Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're exploring something truly mind-bending. 3 real-life cases with twists so unbelievably shocking, you'd think they were straight out of a Hollywood writer's room. But here's the crazy part. Every single detail you're about to hear is 100% real.
Okay, let's dive right into this. What actually happens when reality just completely shatters our expectations? We're going to walk through an anthology of 3 chronological cases that will absolutely challenge your perception of reality. So brace yourself, because the twists we're uncovering today, they're going to leave you completely speechless. Case number 1, the girl with no past.
So meet Sharon Marshall. On the surface, she seemed like this brilliant, super high-achieving teenager. She had this amazingly bright public persona, right? A lieutenant colonel in the ROTC who even scored a full-ride aerospace engineering scholarship to Georgia Tech. But behind closed doors, her private reality was incredibly chaotic. Back in high school, she was secretly pregnant, gave the baby up for adoption, lost her shot at college, and ended up moving down to Florida with a much, much older, aggressive guy named Frank Floyd. Soon after that, she had a second child, Michael, and had to rely on welfare and exotic dancing just to scrape by.
Well, things escalated quickly, and super suspiciously. Sharon had a coworker friend named Cheryl Camesso. Cheryl actually ended up reporting Sharon to social services for hiding income, which instantly cut off Sharon's welfare. In retaliation, Frank violently punched Cheryl in the face right outside their work. And shortly after that, Cheryl just completely vanishes. Poof, gone. Frank and Sharon immediately fled under fake aliases. But before Sharon could pull off a plan to finally leave Frank, she was the victim of a highly suspicious hit and run, and later died in the hospital. The crazy thing is, the doctor actually classified her death as a homicide. He noted old bruises and head injuries that frankly just did not match up with a car accident. It is a terrifying sequence of events.
$80,000. That's the life insurance policy Frank took out on Sharon just months before she died. But here's the catch. To claim that money, his fake aliases wouldn't work. His own greed literally forced him to give the insurance company his real full name, Franklin Delano Floyd. And boom, that instantly exposed his shocking criminal past, including a 1962 conviction for abducting a 4-year-old girl and even a bank robbery.
So, with Frank's real identity exposed, he's sent back to prison, and little Michael is placed in a really loving foster home. But when Frank gets released in 1994, it sets off this terrifying chain of events. First, a DNA test proves Frank isn't Michael's biological father, which completely stops his visitation rights. Enraged, Frank literally shows up at Michael's elementary school, holds Principal James Davis at gunpoint, ties him to a tree, kidnaps young Michael, and goes on the run. Frank was finally caught 2 months later in Kentucky, but tragically there was absolutely no sign of Michael. And this brilliantly illustrates how physical evidence ultimately caught up with him. In 1995, skeletal remains were discovered in Florida. Later that exact same year, a mechanic bought an abandoned, stolen truck that had been linked to Frank. Inside, an envelope stuffed with 97 horrific photos of a bound, beaten woman. Investigators actually matched a very specific cheekbone wound from those photos to the skull of the remains found earlier. It was Cheryl Camesso. That grim connection is what finally landed Frank on death row. But wait, it gets even darker. Those photos contained a second, older set of images showing a deeply disturbing crime: Frank assaulting a young girl. In 2014, investigators uncovered a twist so massive it honestly defies belief. Sharon Marshall wasn't who she thought she was. Her true identity? Suzanne Marie Savarkis. She was the daughter of a woman Frank had married way back in the 1970s. Frank had literally kidnapped his own stepdaughter, raised her under false aliases, subjected her to unthinkable abuse, eventually married her, and then kidnapped her child. To make matters worse, Frank finally admitted to shooting and killing little Michael. It is just a profoundly tragic end to a web of absolute evil and lies. Case number 2. The Anonymous Crow. All right, let's move across the globe to 1980s France. Jean-Marie and Christine Villman were a perfectly normal, happy couple who had just welcomed a bright baby boy named Gregory. But for years, this poor family was relentlessly tormented by anonymous, threatening phone calls and letters. Then the absolute unthinkable happened. 4-year-old Gregory was taken right from his front yard and tragically found bound and drowned in the Valone River. The very next day, this exact letter arrived from the anonymous killer, a person the French public dubbed the Crow. It read, "I hope you die of grief, boss.
Your money won't bring back your son. Here's my revenge, you.
Just chillin'.
As you can imagine, the aftermath of little Gregory's murder just descended into absolute chaos. Let's look at this timeline. In 1985, Jean-Marie's cousin Bernard LaRoche was arrested based on a family statement, but he was later cleared. Then, in a completely shocking twist, on March 25th, handwriting experts pointed the finger at Gregory's own mother, Christine. Just 4 days later, absolutely refusing to believe his wife was guilty and entirely convinced his cousin was the actual killer, Jean-Marie took violent revenge. He shot and killed LaRoche right outside his workplace.
The ripple effects of this case completely devastated everyone involved. Jean-Marie served prison time for the murder of his cousin. Christine, meanwhile, was officially charged with her own son's murder. She went on an 11-day hunger strike to protest her innocence, and she tragically miscarried a twin pregnancy before finally being cleared years later. And, the trauma extended for decades. 33 years after Gregory's death, the original investigating magistrate actually took his own life, completely overwhelmed by the unbearable pressure and criticism of the unsolved case.
But there is a glimmer of hope here. In December of 2020, the case was reopened, this time relying on a fascinating new technology called stylometrics. Basically, this is the intricate analysis of syntax, punctuation, and specific phrasing within those old threatening letters to identify an anonymous author. Armed with this tool, authorities have reportedly identified a new suspect. This leaves us with the very real possibility that the identity of the crow might finally, after all these years, be revealed.
Case number 3, the impossible imposter.
So, back in 1994, 13-year-old Nicholas Barkley vanished in San Antonio, Texas. He was known as a pretty troubled youth, and he disappeared one night after his older brother Jason refused to give him a ride home. For 3 whole years, the family grieved, naturally assuming the absolute worst. Then came this staggering update. Nicholas was found alive in Linares, Spain. The family got a miracle call saying he had been kidnapped by a trafficking ring, moved all the way to Europe, and had finally escaped. His sister Carrie immediately jumped on a plane to Spain to bring him home.
But here's where this miracle story instantly stops making sense. The real Nicholas was an American kid with blonde hair and blue eyes. The person they recovered, he had dark hair, brown eyes, and spoke with a very, very heavy French accent. His excuse for this? It is completely baffling. He literally told the family his captors performed bizarre chemical experiments to change his eye and hair color to hide his identity. I mean, wow.
Let's move on and see how this builds, because this bizarre excuse unraveled incredibly fast into an explosive revelation. A film crew was actually documenting his return, and they brought along a highly skeptical private investigator. That investigator did something so simple. He just filmed the returned boy's ears and compared them to childhood photos of Nicholas. You see, ears don't change shape, and they did not match. This single, clever observation brought the FBI rushing in, who quickly took fingerprints and DNA.
And that DNA test revealed an astounding truth. The boy wasn't Nicholas at all. He was Frédéric Pierre Bardin, a 23-year-old notorious French con artist, known as the Chameleon. This guy had already assumed over 500 different identities. He had successfully fooled authorities across 2 continents before he was finally caught and sentenced to 6 years in prison for passport fraud and perjury.
But this brings us to a really chilling question. It's perhaps the darkest twist of this entire explainer. Why on earth did the Barkley family blindly accept a 23-year-old dark-haired French stranger as their blonde 13-year-old son? Well, Frédéric himself dropped a massive bombshell. He claimed the family wasn't fooled at all. He said they knew he was fake right from the start and were actively playing along.
The suspicions compiled by investigators are deeply, deeply unsettling. Frédéric alleged that Nicholas's sister, Carrie, actually fed him family knowledge to help him pass the police tests. Investigators also looked back at an unexplained 911 call Jason made 3 months after the original disappearance, where he claimed Nicholas was breaking into the garage, which is actually a common tactic used to make a victim appear alive. The popular, though unproven theory that investigators and Frédéric landed on was that Jason may have murdered Nicholas, and the family used Frédéric as a convenient cover-up. But before Jason could be thoroughly investigated, he tragically died from a fatal overdose, taking any potential answers straight to the grave with him.
Which leaves us staring at this final, really haunting reality. We have untangled the unbelievable twists in these cases today, the hidden identities, the fake aliases, the imposters. But despite pulling back the curtain on these incredible Hollywood-level mysteries, the ultimate fates of the original innocent victims remain completely unknown. What truly happened to little Michael, Gregory, and Nicholas? It's a sobering reminder that sometimes the most complex puzzles leave the most important pieces missing. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this challenged the way you view the fragile line between reality and fiction.